Hello, this is Tim Stutler. Welcome to a Goodlettsville Church production. Here in the fall of 2022, my wife and I had the joy of traveling to Israel. It was the first time that we were ever able to go. We traveled with Clayton King Ministries, with Clayton and Shari King, and 16 people from the Southeast United States. We had an incredible time. And so what I did, I filmed each one of these stops, and we wanted to share those with you. We're calling this series The Lay of the Land. I hope that you enjoy it. Welcome to this episode of The Lay of the Land. Today we are looking at the Garden Tomb. There's two places in Jerusalem where they believe Jesus could have been buried. This is probably the less likely one, but it certainly gives us a wonderful picture of what it probably looked like where Jesus was buried. The other one is the traditional site that's in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But this was a beautiful place to visit. There is a very good argument that this could have been the place. But one thing's for sure, especially here at Easter, it gives us a lot to think about, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so we will be there with our tour guide. He will talk us through, and you'll hear from others as well. I hope you enjoy the Garden Tomb.
My name is Stuart. I'm one of the volunteer guides here, and I'm a pastor from Wales. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I don't know anything at all about you. So friends, it's good to have a laugh together. I've got 5 things to tell you here. The first is that we know that Jesus was crucified outside the walls of the city. Over there is the north wall of the city, 200 yards away. There was a wall there in the time of Christ. Various other walls have been built in different locations. That one's always been in the same place. Secondly, when the Romans crucified people, they deliberately did it in the most public place possible. The purpose of crucifixion was not to put somebody to death, but to intimidate the local population. If they wanted to put them to death, they only needed a knife or a sword. It was done, and take the body away. The purpose of crucifixion was to wave a fist under the nose of the people who they were occupying. They were the occupying power here, and so they would have chosen to crucify in a public place. As a matter of policy, they did it alongside highways. Here, you've got the intersection of 2 major highways. The one coming out of the Damascus Gate going north, the north-south artery, Jerusalem to Damascus, but also the east-west, from the Jordan Valley down to the Mediterranean Sea. And that passed across the north wall of the city, down to the sea. So this location was absolutely perfect for their purposes. It would have caught a large number of people, merchants, traders, travelers, farm workers, going out of the city to their fields and going back again in the evening. They would have passed by and they would have seen what was going on. And they would have known that this was a Roman power, the power of the empire. So that's point number 2. Point number 3. They came here in 63 BC and conquered the land. Before they came here, the Jews had got an execution site here. Now, if you remember, the Jewish people executed by stoning. And the reason that they came here was because of the cliff. The person who had been convicted was thrown off the top of the cliff. Their body arrived down at the bottom of the cliff where there were other people waiting for them, and they had rocks in their hands. And they systematically crushed the skull of the person who had been put to death, who was being put to death. It was bloody, it was up close and personal, but it was also merciful in comparison to crucifixion, which would take 2, sometimes 3 days. So this was a known site of execution by the Jews of the Jewish people. If the Romans came here and they used the same location, there would have been no resistance from the Jewish population of the city, because the site was defiled and unclean where a Jewish conscience was concerned. So that's point number 3. Point number 4. The hillside behind me for 150 plus years has looked like the face of a skull. Now we know that Jesus was crucified at Golgotha, the place of a skull. If you have a look at this photograph from 100 years ago, you can see the features of a skull in it. The eye sockets, the bridge of the nose, and maybe the outline of a skull. Now there are two problems as I show you this photograph. There are the eye sockets, the bridge of the nose, and the features of the skull. Two problems. The first is that the hill doesn't look exactly the same now, because 7 years ago in a winter frost, that bit between the eyes broke away. So the area that we're looking at is over here, and you can see a kind of upside down V, and what would be two eye sockets. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is that all of the photographs that we have from the time of Jesus have been lost. So we have no idea what the hillside looked like. So for me to stand here and say to you, this is Golgotha, the place of the skull, because of the appearance of this hill, even for 200 years, I'm afraid is very poor evidence indeed, because we've no idea what it looked like 2,000 years ago. But it still may be Golgotha because skulls were crushed here. So it may be Golgotha for a different reason rather than the appearance of the cliff. But I said there were 5 points, and this is the fifth. The Gospels tell us, close by the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden there was a tomb. Now you walked through a garden in order to get here. In the time of Christ, that was an agricultural garden. They were growing grapes there, and we have evidence, archaeological evidence, that it was a vineyard. So, is this the exact spot of Jesus' crucifixion? The answer to that is a definite maybe. We have absolutely no idea. There are two places where the crucifixion and resurrection are commemorated. One is here, the other is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Has that been on your itinerary?
It's next.
You're going there this afternoon, that's fine. Well, you will have a chance to experience it. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built on the outside of what was the Western Gate. Bear in mind that I said that the crucifixion took place in the most public place possible. Outside the Western Gate there was only one route, and it was going down to the Mediterranean Sea. Up here there were 4 routes going in different directions. That was the traditional site when Queen Helena, when the empire became Christian. Constantine invited his mother to come to Palestine and to look for the sites that commemorated the life events of Christ. That was the site that they settled on. They had to demolish the temple of Aphrodite before they started building the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But ever since the 4th century, that has been the traditional site. Now during the last couple of centuries, as increasing numbers of Protestants came, and their experience of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre left them feeling very unrewarded spiritually. They went inside a building that was unfamiliar to them. They had a smell of incense and of candles that was not familiar to them. They saw pictures and icons and crucifixes, which again they found difficult to handle, and they began to cast around for a place which they, as Protestants, could use and commemorate the crucifixion. So sometimes this place is called the Protestant Calvary. What we say to people who come here is today you will never be closer than you are at this moment to the exact place where Jesus was crucified. If it was where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands, it's less than a mile away. If this is the location, then you're right on top of it. But what is much more important than where Jesus was crucified is why he was crucified. And on that subject there is no debate, because Jesus gave us the response in his own words. He said, "I've not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many." Now we understand ransoms because they're still being paid in our own generation. Some evil people, they kidnap somebody else, they keep them captive, and they won't release them until money changes hands. When Jesus paid your ransom, it was not with money. He didn't reach his hand into his pocket and get out his wallet and check to see whether or not he got enough of the right kind of currency. When he was crucified, there was no money that was being shared amongst the soldiers. They cast dice for his clothes. That was all that he owned. So he was not going to pay with anything material. He paid for you, he paid your ransom, not with an open wallet, but with an open vein. He gave his life for your life, and that was what took place, as close as you are ever going to be to the exact spot. Maybe here. Remember, he didn't do it because you're good. He did it because you'll never be good enough for God. He didn't do it because you are worthy. He did it because he is worthy. And this was a demonstration of the amazing grace of God. And that's what we sing about in that hymn. So please, when you go from here, don't say, I wonder whether that was the right place. Rather, reflect on the right reason for the cross. But there's one more thing. Look at the height of the cliff that is behind me. And imagine, if you can, fill in your imagination the hillside. Because this was an escarpment that ran all the way from here, right across to the wall of the city. The wall of the city, 3/4 of it, is built on a quarry face. This is one quarry face, that's the other quarry face, and all of the stone in between the two was excavated before the time of Christ. Why did they stop here? It wasn't because they didn't need some more stone. They stopped here because the quality of the stone that remains in the hillside is poor. The quarrymen said there's no point in us going any further with this because all that we've got here is rubble. And so they went to other places in order to find the stone that they needed. Now, if it is true that Jesus was crucified somewhere down here where the buses are standing, not up on the top of the hill, get rid of that as an idea, because people were talking to Jesus as they were going past on the road. There wasn't any road up there, there never ever has been. They put a sign over his head that said, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Nobody walking past down here would be able to read it. So if this is the location, then the cross was here, and this was the curtain that hung behind the cross. Why do I point this out? Because there is a verse in Psalm 118 that says this: the stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. Jesus took that statement and he applied it to himself several times. It was written 1,000 years before, looking forward to the coming of the Messiah. Here comes the Messiah, and he uses those words about himself. The stone that the builders rejected. Remember that Jesus was rejected because of the things that he was preaching and teaching. The quarrymen said about the stone here, it's rubbish. The Jewish authorities said about the preaching of Jesus, it's rubbish. They convicted him of the crime of blasphemy. The stone that the builders rejected has become the head of the corner. 2,000 years later, this is an indisputable statement. 2,000 years later, Jesus is the central figure of the human race. 2.6 billion people name him as their Lord and themselves as his disciple. And I'm one of them.
Amen.
I trust you are too. So, my friends, let the hillside preach a little sermon to you. Take whatever photographs you want, a photo of the photo if you want. Now, this was rediscovered in 1924. It is Roman style, so it was here in the time of Christ. That means that this area was a vineyard. You only put a wine press in a vineyard. You don't put one anywhere else. So point number one. Point number two. The tomb that we have here and the tomb of Jesus was closed using a rolling stone, coin-shaped. That's how this tomb was closed. Point number three. The tomb of Jesus was chiseled out of solid rock. That's how this tomb was made. It's living rock, we would say. Point number four. The tomb of Jesus was the tomb of a rich man. Joseph of Arimathea was wealthy. Only somebody who was wealthy would be able to afford to have a tomb of this kind built. It would have taken months to do, and you would have had to have employed skilled craftsmen to make it. Point number five. This was the one that surprised me when I came here. Joseph of Arimathea, who owned Jesus' tomb, was a senior Jewish political leader. So any tomb that he built was going to be built according to Jewish custom. and anybody who was buried in it would also be buried according to Jewish custom. Now, if I was to ask you what was the Jewish custom of burial in the first century, you wouldn't need to scratch your head, you would just need to tell me how Jesus was buried. His body was wrapped in perfumed linen, and it was laid on a ledge. It wasn't put into the ground under dirt, soil. It was laid on a ledge, and the expectation was that it was going to rot. Now, if you bury a body like that, you must expect that it's going to smell. If you want to continue to use the tomb, then you would be wise to put in a ventilation shaft. That is exactly what we've got down here. If you look at the entrance to the tomb, and above to the right-hand side, you can see an arch-shaped window. That is a Jewish ventilation shaft. It does let in light, but it is there to take out the smell of a decomposing body. This is a Jewish tomb. Point number 6. The tomb that Jesus was buried in was big enough for 5 or 6 people to go inside it. So it was not just a small hole in the ground, but rather a substantial tomb chamber. Now, how do we know that that is so? We know because of what Luke's gospel tells us. He tells us the names. He said there was Mary Magdalene, there was Joanna, and there was Mary, the mother of James, and the other women. And Luke says they went inside the tomb. So Jesus was not buried in a little hole that took a body or two. He was buried inside a tomb that was large enough for a number of people to go inside. Now, you are going to go inside 6 or 7 or even 8 at a time. This is the floor plan of the tomb. It's divided into 2 chambers. On the one side, you've got the weeping chamber, which is where the body was prepared for burial. And on the other side, you've got the burial chamber, where the body would lie. 3 grave beds and the weeping chamber. This is big enough for you to go inside exactly as Luke describes. So, again, it corresponds to the gospel documents. Point number 7. The women have been instructed by an angel that he is not here, he is risen. They go to find the men. And we have some remarkable, incidental, non-essential details from John as he writes what happened next. He said that he and Peter came running to the tomb. He said that he ran faster than Peter. He said that he got to the tomb first. He said that he stood at the entrance to the tomb but did not go in. He said that from the entrance to the tomb he could look across and he was able to see the grave bed where the body had been lying. He could see the grave clothes. He could see the napkin that had been on Jesus' head, and he could see that the body was gone. I don't think it's going to be more than a flurry. I don't think we need to worry too much. From the door, he could see that the body had gone. If you stand at the doorway here and you look diagonally across the tomb, you can see that grave bed in your eye line. You can't see this one and you can't see that one. To see those, you've got to go inside. Now just imagine with me for a moment. Here is John and he arrives at the entrance to the tomb. The entrance is half the height that the present one is now. In order to go inside, you would have to have gone in on your hands and knees. Right? So the closer that John gets to the entrance to the tomb, what happens inside the tomb? It gets darker. So the closer that he gets to the tomb, the less he can see, because his body is shutting out the light source. So how can he see? He can see because it's a Jewish tomb with a ventilation shaft that doesn't just take out the smell of decomposition, but lets light in. And the light from this tomb shines across onto that grave bed there, the one that is in your eye line. Point number 8. If you're coming to this tomb with the expectation that you might see a dead body, I'm disappointed in you, and you will be disappointed when you go inside, because he's not here, he is risen.
Risen indeed.
And that's what we proclaim here.
This is the wine press that they discovered. It proves that this was a garden.
Well, there we have it. A place, if not where Jesus was laid, a place a lot like it. In a garden where he was buried, but 3 days later the stone was rolled away and he rose from the dead. I pray that this has encouraged your heart, and I hope that you have an incredible Easter. God bless you.